Akshpada Gautama was an Indian philosopher who founded the Nyaya, or school of logical procedures, sometime in the 6th century BCE, and is credited with the composition of the text, the Nyaya Sutras. He is often just called Gautama, and should not be confused with Siddhartha, the founder of the Buddhist faith. We know very little about Gautama, but we do know that the Nyaya school was closely associated with the Vaisheshika school of atomists, borrowing heavily from their metaphysical speculations. The Nyaya also positioned themselves in opposition to the skepticism of the Ajnana and the early Buddhists, but would also come to see the subtle philosophy of the Mimamsa as opponents in their quest for logical foundations of knowledge. Borrowing from the Vaisheshika, the early Nyaya accepted the external world as a reality, and as such they ascribed to the messenger theory of truth, in that a statement or thought was true insomuch as that it conformed to the reality which it described. To describe a situation where truth is understood, the Nyaya used the term jnana, translated as knowledge, but also representing cognition. An example of this would be the situation in which the mind adopted a true disposition towards the world. For instance, when seeing smoke arising from a hill, assuming correctly that there is a fire. However, the term ajnana, identical to the name of the skeptical heterodox school, is used to describe when an incorrect cognition is made. For instance, when a person mistakes a cloud of dust billowing off the hilltop as smoke and wrongly assumes the presence of a fire. Gautama doesn't reject the idea of incorrect cognition that results in truthful understanding of the world. For example, although the dust cloud was misperceived as smoke, there could still actually be a fire on the hill. However, he ascribes to this a lesser form of knowledge compared to true jnana. The Nyaya, having accepted this theory of truth, then attempt to systematize the mechanisms by which an individual can come to attain correct knowledge, which was known in Sanskrit as pramana. Gautama settles on 4, including the 2 of the Vaisheshika, perception and influence, as well as comparison and testimony. Perception was seen as coming from the 6 senses: sight, smell, hearing, touch, taste, and mind. However, Gautama also accepted extraordinary senses. This included the memory of previous senses experience conjuring up by otherwise inappropriate sensory sources. For example, the understanding that a chili will be hot upon its visual recognition. This class also included the ability of certain persons of supernatural ability to perceive the past, present, and future, something that was foundational for later acceptance of the authority of the Vedas. The knowledge drawn from perception was called prama, animal or brute knowledge. If the Nyaya epistemology rested upon this alone, then they could accurately be described as externalists. However, Gautama and his school also describe nirnaya, or certified knowledge, which has been subjected to the rigorous tools of logic, thus accepting a more moderate internalist epistemic position. To achieve this certification, Gautama advocated for the 5-part syllogism. For those in the Western tradition, they would perhaps be more familiar with the 3-part syllogism of Aristotle and the Greek logicians. For reference, the 3 parts of Greek syllogisms were the major and minor premises and the conclusion. The classic example of this is as follows. The major premise, stating a general rule, is that all men are mortal. The minor premise, stating a specific instance, is that Socrates is a man. The conclusion, deducing from the above statements, is that Socrates is immortal. The classic example used by Gautama for his Nyaya syllogism once again draws us back to the blazing mountain. The first part of the syllogism is the statement to be proved, called the pratinya, which in this case is that there is a fire on the hill. The second part of the syllogism is the statement of reason, called the hetu, in this example, because there is smoke. The third part of the statement is the general rule, called the udaharana, which is similar to the major premise. For this case, it is that wherever there is smoke, there is fire, like in the kitchen. The fourth part is the application of the rule to the case, or upanaya. In this example, the hill is also smoky. The fifth and final part of the syllogism is drawing the conclusion, or nigamana. which in this case is, therefore, there is a fire on the hill. The characteristic difference between the Greek and Nyaya syllogism is Gautama's demand that in the statement of the general rule it must also include an example, suggesting the Nyaya were not only concerned with the formal truth of a statement, but also in its material validity. Beyond perception and inference, the Nyaya also accepted comparison as a valid source of pramana. Comparison is the kind of analytic judgments made from analyzing the name of an object prior to its perception and deriving from the meaning of its name its form. However, the Nyaya did not subscribe to a realist conception of language and accepted the nominalist nature of words, in that their meaning is assigned through societal convention. Despite this, as the words are derived either through the testimony of others or inference, all based upon a foundation of perception, then this analytic linguistic method can still provide us insights into an object prior to our attaining specific sense data about it. The final form of accepted pramana was testimony. This included testimony from trusted persons, but also drew upon the idea of the sage and supernatural perception, allowing for the transmission of knowledge that would otherwise be unavailable to the laity. It is through testimony that Gautama accepts the Vedas as revealed truth, and through this acceptance, the inclusion of Nyaya into the orthodox schools of Hindu philosophy. At this point, I think it is worth mentioning that this sophisticated system of logic developed by the Nyaya was always intended to be a guide to accessing true knowledge. For the Nyaya, like the Vaisheshika, by accessing true knowledge, we can attain liberation from this world. Once again, the system of philosophy aiming at moksha and release from samsara. In conclusion, the Nyaya school of Gautama developed a sophisticated indigenous system of formal Indian logic, before such formal logic was developed in Greece, and in a way that was never fully borne out in China despite the efforts of the school of names. Nyaya would go on to be immensely influential across all schools of orthodox Indian philosophy, as well as on the Jain and Buddhist traditions. In attacking the skepticism of early Buddhism, the Nyaya stimulated the works of the Buddhist logicians such as Nagarjuna. It is in the interplay of these back and forth disputations and polemics that Indian philosophy, both orthodox and heterodox, developed increasingly sophisticated arguments about reality, divinity, logic, and ethics, very much likened to the fruits of a gem tumbler. However, to truly appreciate the sophistication of these later arguments, I would suggest that by reading and understanding the Nyaya Sutra, we can grasp at the root of these disputations, and at least begin to understand the context and environment in which they developed.